Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Audrey, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I am so excited to welcome you to tonight's event with Sofi Thanhauser discussing her new book, Worn, A People's History of Clothing. She is joined tonight in conversation by Avery Trufelman. Through good times and bad, Harvard Bookstore will continue to bring authors and their work to our virtual community. Our spring season is in full swing, and you don't want to miss out on our lineup. Make sure to check out our event schedule on harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our email newsletter and browse our shelves from home. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for questions. If you have a question at any time during the talk, go to the Q&A button on your screen and we'll get through as many as time allows. If you'd like to purchase a copy of Worn, there will be a link in the chat where you can purchase. All sales through this link support Harvard Bookstore, so thank you. You also have the option for closed captioning for this talk. If you would like closed captioning for this event, click the CC button on your screen. Thank you again for tuning in support of our authors, our incredible booksellers, and our landmark independent bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support, especially now. And as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them as quickly as we can. Thank you in advance for your patience and understanding. Now I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's speakers. Sofi Thanhauser teaches in the writing department at Pratt Institute. She has received fellowships and residencies at MacDowell, UCross Foundation, and the Miley Colony for the Arts. Sofi has had her writing widely published, including in The Establishment, Essay Daily, Wag's Review, The Spectator, White Hot Magazine of Contemporary Art, The Conservant, Entropy, and Edible Vineyard, among other publications. She is joined by Avery Trufelman. Avery is an alumna of the award-winning design podcast 99% Invisible. In 2018, she launched a limited-run series about clothing and fashion called Articles of Interest, which was declared one of the best podcasts of 2018 by The New Yorker. I can confirm it's amazing. And the finale was called the Best Podcast Episode of the Year by Vulture. She is the host of Nice Try, as well as the host of the podcast For the Cut. Tonight, they are discussing Worn. This is a book I am personally so excited for. In this panoramic social history, Sofi tells 5 stories. The stories of linen, cotton, silk, synthetics, and wool. While looking at the past and how these fabrics were created and used throughout time, she also looks at our current uses and their consequences, from the detriment of pollution to the horrors of labor camps. And I'll leave you with this quote from Peggy Orenstein. Sofi Thanhauser's history of cloth is not just about clothing. It's about ethics, workers' rights, women's progress, climate justice. It is about the fabric of who we are. And as told and worn, it also makes an absolutely gripping read. And on that note of high praise, I'll turn things over to our speakers. Sofi, Avery, thank you so much for joining us tonight. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Audrey. This is
Thanks,
really
Audrey.
a treat. Oh my God, Sofi, I have like a million things I want to ask you, but I'll just start with this like super light, easy, fun opener. You say that among the triptych of human needs, which is clothing, food, and shelter, clothing is the only one that we don't share with the rest of the animal kingdom. And so I wanted to ask, what is it about clothing that makes us human, or why is that the distinctive marker for what our species is?
Oh, that's a good question. It's funny because I think that when I think back to that phrase, for myself anyways, what I was actually trying to mark is that there is a lot of commonalities between, I'm sorry, my mother is listening to this next door and I can't hear 2 of myself. Mom, you have to turn it off. It's good. I'm really glad she's here, but it's like, she needs headphones.
Oh, totally. But it's like the equivalent of her like heckling you there in the store. It's like a simulation of a very real phenomenon.
Thank you. That's a really good point. If this were live, something like that would be happening.
She's like standing up and taking your picture. Yeah.
So what I was trying to say is that I, as a kid, found it very weird that if left alone, I could not provide my own food, shelter, or clothing. I think that was weird. And I felt like I read books about kids who know how to do that, or cultures in which that was part of everyday vernacular and like accessible to people. And I think I grew acclimated as I grew older to this culture and to this epoch as one in which I dress in objects, eat objects, live in objects whose origins I don't really understand, that I couldn't really produce, so in a way I had the idea for a book maybe concurrently or before or after Warren that was about food, shelter, and clothing, I think. So in a way, I see the same phenomenon at work in all three. Like I want someone to do the housing version of this. Like I've been saying, like I want to do for clothing what Michael Pollan did for food. And now I want somebody to do that for housing too, because I think it's something that should be really transparent and isn't. But I feel like I'm not answering your question. And the thing is, I don't know the answer. I think that's why I'm not answering it. Like, I think it's so tempting to say this is the thing that makes a human human. It's a nice shout out to our mutual friend, Brian Christian, who wrote a book called The Most Human Human. And I remember my friend Luke, who's actually in the book, saying to me once that what made humans human was that we're tool makers, which I think isn't true. I think there are other species that make tools. But anyways, I said to him at that moment, what about clothes? And he was like, clothes are a tool. Clothing is a tool. So clothing could be considered a tool, and it certainly allows us to do things that we couldn't do without clothing. But it has all of these other functions that evoke I'm thinking of other, it's fun to compare, although it feels somehow like irresponsible. Like I almost don't want to touch it. It like immediately feels irresponsible to describe human behavior in terms of animal behavior because of like probably the history surrounding that. But I'm like, well, there were like peacocks when we wear clothes, or we're like using them for mating rituals. And that's all true. I think beauty matters and attraction and seduction matters, but I think dressing up and well, I mean, that too, I guess, happens in the animal kingdom, dressing up as some other animal. I just saw a really, really disturbing and interesting video of this orchid that mimics a wasp, so that male wasps come and try to have sex with the orchid, and then it goes and pollinates other wasps. So anyways, I think for me dressing up really matters, and like coming into to being an incarnated being, which is already really weird, and then having the capacity for speech and then also for thought, and which I think we share with like the rest of the animal and like living world. But to me, getting into playing one role, just one particular role, Sofi Thanhauser, is kind of about a costume. It's like you put on a costume, here you are, there's just one of you, it seems, and you're in a particular human costume, and individuality, whether that's something that we made up as people, it certainly causes a lot of problems, but it does seem to be something that we're very invested in. I'm an individual, you're an individual. And to the extent that humans are into being individuals, I think we like to wear clothes. That's what I'm going to say to that.
Oh my God, but that opens up so many other kettles of fish. Actually, it was like, oh, I know the question I'm going to ask next. But then as soon as you ended on that, I mean, you talk about the difference and weird similarities between mass consumption in like communist countries, where you have a version of the same dress being made like many thousands of times for presumably, you know, proletariat housewives to wear. And we actually developed almost a very similar system of manufacturing, making like thousands and thousands of identical clothes under capitalism. But in one economy, you know, dressing the same is functionally a uniform, and under capitalism, for some reason, we've created the idea that we can buy these mass-produced goods and still use it as a way to express our individualism. And like, how did that come about? How did clothing become a form of like, this is who I am, special me individual?
Oh, I like what you did there. I like what you did there a lot. I mean, I think one of the things that I try to do in the chapter that's about the birth of American advertising, which I think has a lot to do with the way that clothes are marketed today and all things are marketed today, is to talk about a couple of things. One, this is sort of drawing from a historian named Stuart Ewan, who I really like, that American marketers discovered that manufacturing labor was very stultifying and boring, and that they could use that dissatisfaction to market to people because they knew that people had like a hole that needed filling because their work was unsatisfying. And one of their innovations was to turn that like gaping hole into the desire for a product that you could buy. So that's like one of the things that I try to chart in the chapter about advertising. But I wanted to set that up in the chapter before that by talking about like by the court of Louis XIV, because I think American advertisers who were hawking mass-produced garments really, really drew on a huge cachet that already existed, that was built around artisanal objects that actually were unique, that actually were created for an individual human body. So, I mean, if a tailor makes you a garment, it is your garment and it is designed for your shape, and it is an individual garment. If it is mass manufactured, it is inherently not for your shape exactly, but it's so important to make it feel like it's for you because, like you said, I think in America, one of the hugest sales techniques to this day is this mass-produced product will make you special and you unique, and it is different. It's like it's the whole game. And I do think that I'm glad you raised the point about Russia, because I think it's interesting to think about how two cultures existing concurrently could come up with two such radically different ways of talking about the same basic phenomenon. And I think that like it matters to me how things look, and I think that is part of what not necessarily drove this book or originated this book, but it continues to be part of how I think. It's like, I think what we can see matters. And so to think about how two cultures might be saying very different things, but on the level of material look very similar, like that matters to me. So it's like, why do these two things look the same, but they're telling different stories about themselves? So I think that dissonance was really one that I found very interesting, and I'm glad you bring it up.
Well, it's really interesting because I feel like every time I think about fashion, it's like, okay, you know, fashion is like kind of a construct. Like someone can say something is in or out. But I think, like, as you say, and as you mentioned just now, like clothing marketing was basically created to like fill the void of emptiness from like horrible 9-to-5s and needing something more in life. And now you see clothing marketed as a panacea, essentially, to be like, oh, there's clothing for wellness, there's clothing for sexual allure, there's clothing for upward mobility and like success in business. It can be whatever you need it to be. And part of it is like, oh, that's genius of marketing, but also some of it is kind of true. Like, how much of this is about the perceived power of clothes, and how much do these things actually retain real power? And is there a difference between like real power and perceived power in clothes?
Ooh, good question. I mean, I think that it worked. Yeah, I think it's such a powerful thing because it is based on a real ancient relationship with garments and appearance. Like it, yeah, I think it works because it's connected to something real. I mean, I certainly desire things. I have desire, and and I think, honestly, I think a new garment can change a person's life. Like I've had that experience. I'm not saying that's not a real phenomenon, but I want to, I don't think I'm just shimmying out of the question because it's such a hard one. about what's the difference between real and perceived power. No biggie. But I think another thing that Stuart Ewan talks about is that it wasn't just that this marketing strategy was developed to fill a hole. It was developed to fill a hole that many people were actively concerned at the time was going to be filled by communism. So it's like, it's very particular, the time in which this happened. It was like a very active like continuum between like more violent forms of repression of the left in the US and this idea that corporations could find an easier, softer way to make workers happier. That was like the explicit argument. You have discontent, don't channel it politically, do channel it into buying a Frigidaire. And that, it's kind of an important story, I think, for the century and this century too.
But I mean, if we're calling clothing a piece of technology, like why invest in clothing more than a Frigidaire? And I'm thinking like, you have some pretty concrete examples in the book of the power of clothes. And some are really horrifying, like the fact that the Ku Klux Klan revived itself in the 1920s, and like uniforms were a huge part of their pitch, basically. And that, when Indigenous Americans were basically like children were funneled off into boarding schools, a huge part of their, the mission of basically anglicizing Indigenous Americans was like putting them in a uniform. Like, again, another unanswerable question, but just go for it. Like, what is the power of this particular technology more than, say, a Frigidaire?
It's such a good question. I think I'm going to tell a story.
Yeah.
Because I don't know the answer again. But when I was in Vietnam, I really wanted to go into an export processing zone. And I was having a hard time as a journalist. So I thought I would try it as an investor's assistant.
Wait, can you explain what an export processing zone is? I didn't
Yes.
know this before.
So an export processing zone is a piece of land inside a country, and in this case, it was in the country of Vietnam, that exists as a separate legal entity from that country, and in which a lot of manufacturing happens. Clothing, electronics, light manufacturing. What it does is it provides a space in which, like, when you go through the airport and suddenly there's no taxes for a second?
Yeah.
Or you have the vague sense that on a ship, there's a different set of laws. It's one of those things where it's in a country, but it has a different set of rules. And often those rules make it very easy for large corporations to go into a country that has really cheap labor, but maybe doesn't have great security or doesn't have great infrastructure, or has formidable tax barriers, and use this space to have no import tax, no export tax, generators, security guards, so that they can access the low rate of labor in that country without actually having to make sure that country has basic infrastructure. So that's,
as you put it, it's like, I thought this was a very useful way to put it. You were like, it's an extraction unit functionally, the way banana plantations or sugar plantations were in the past. It's just with like manufactured goods.
Functionally, that's exactly right. And I think the reason why it's necessary to say that is that often the language used to describe what export processing zones do makes it seem that they're very beneficial to the country that hosts them. But people who really study them notice that they don't actually use any raw materials from the country. They're not actually developing capacity in the form of technology or training people to do things that they might take out of the export processing zone. They're not actually building the economy of the country. They really are just extracting cheap labor and using like usually low-skilled, producing low-skilled jobs that barely allows the workers to survive, and that's it. That's pretty much it. I mean, they do provide jobs. That is true. They do provide jobs, but so does a banana plantation. So yeah, that's the thing. So I wanted to visit an export processing zone, and they didn't necessarily write back to me. And so I thought I could pretend I was an assistant to an investor. And I had my friend Tom write them because he's a man and he lives in Rio. And I thought it would just be confusing enough to work. Like he lives in Rio and they're part of this like trade agreement. I don't know what, I mean, I do know why I did this because I wanted to get in, but my name was Chris and I
Oh
was
my
going to
God,
be
you
his
changed
assistant.
your name.
Yes, I played a role. And I was in Vietnam and I had Birkenstocks and probably a linen gingham skirt and maybe a knit linen t-shirt. And I did not, in my opinion, look like Chris, the investor's assistant at all. So I decided to go to Zara because somebody told me once that it was a customer I met at a 4th of July party in New York, told me that when he wants to make a character look rich, he uses Zara because Zara looks like you're rich.
Huh.
Or I thought it would make me look like somebody who wants to look rich, which is in my mind how I thought an investor's assistant would look. So there's a ton of presumptions that were going on for me. But anyways, I went to Zara to buy this dress. And I don't know that then I got my legs waxed and that was this whole disaster. And I think I got too into the role. I think I got too into the role, but it ultimately allowed me to show up and say confidently that I wanted to know what the electricity and water costs were going to be so I could report back to my boss. And I guess I'm just telling that story because I, in that moment, believed that if I got the dress from Zara, I could be Chris and I could get into the export processing zone. And I think that's how I used to, and that was on some level true. I mean, I don't know if they would have turned me away if I'd been wearing hippie stuff, like that might have actually been fine, but that's the level of belief that I had. And I think I had that as a kid, and I think I have that now. And I think we all have, maybe not all of us, but I think a lot of people do have the sense that the right costume can produce a scenario that otherwise could not exist. And I think sometimes that is true.
That's incredible. I can't believe the amount of commitment. That's amazing. Well, okay, it's interesting because you're giving voice to something that I think we all know on a certain level, right? Like when you decide to get dressed in the morning, like you're making that decision based on like what you have to do that day and like who you're going to meet and what the weather is. Like it's pretty obvious that external factors and our mood. I always think of clothing as the literal buffer between your internal and external worlds. It is a reflection both of like what you are trying to project and what the world is projecting onto you, and you mitigate it like through your clothes. But that's different than the thing that you propose in your book, which is you say we need to become readers of cloth. And I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the exact turn of phrase you used, but you were like, even more important that it's like mass produced fabric. And so I wanted to ask you what it means to be a reader of cloth, and if you could like demonstrate. I don't know if you can demonstrate what you're wearing now.
Sure. I think I agree. I just want to say I agree with what you say about that membrane or veil, or forget what you called it, between what we're seeing and what's being seen in us or what's being projected on us. It acts like in a double sense. It acts in a double sense in so many ways. And I think the way that I meant that we need to read fabric is that in addition to having this to working as a costume and to allowing me to take a place in the world, I think garments are always very, very directly and in a certain sense eloquently telling us about the conditions of the world that we live in. Like they're telling us, okay, this country was colonized by this other country in this year, and then this tariff was put in place in this other year, and then this tariff was taken away, and then this dye was invented, and this woman was paid $475. Like all of those stories are there. Everything. I mean, I was thinking about, this is a little bit creepier. I was thinking about my own body recently as a product of all of these forces, because I think in some ways it is. It's a product of other things too, but in some ways it's a product of all of these material histories that have culminated in this particular body. That was kind of like, I was like, whoa, that's weird. But I think it's true. But I think it's particularly clear to me in garments. And there's a story of where the plant grew and who processed it. And there's a physical origin story there. And then there's the history that enabled any of those things to be possible. So, yeah.
That's so true. But when you talk about like reading fabric, this is gonna sound so obvious, but like what does it actually mean? This stuff sounds quite tricky to actually find. When you were talking about the sourcing, even just now when we were talking about export processing zones, when you listed the clothing companies that use this particular export processing zone you went to in Honduras, I was like, I wonder if that was difficult to find. I mean, talking about all these histories is I think it's so important, but I don't think, how can we read this into a cloth if this information is
that's
not available?
It's a really good question, because it's a little bit of a dishonest way of saying it. Like, just look hard enough at the piece of white fabric and you'll see it all. Like, that's a little bit of a poetic statement more than a literal one. But yeah, that was kind of easy to find. It's like not hard to find. I'm thinking about literally finding the brands that were being produced by one of the factories. I'm remembering that it was a very ugly website for that company. But what is your actual question? Because it's not about that website. I think that it's intentionally opaque and it's intentionally described as complex. And one of my intentions was to reduce that complexity a little bit by describing in very broad terms what I see to be the big power differentials that are in play that are creating the garment system that we use. So power differentials between, workers and their bosses or women or men or the global South and the rich countries. I don't know. So I think it's not possible to have a complete answer. I mean, one of the things that I wrote about this past year was Xinjiang cotton. And what's happening right now is really fascinating to me because we have had a law in the US for many decades that makes it illegal to import goods made with slave labor into the US. But until recently, there was a loophole where if it wasn't possible to get those goods in another way, then you could import them. So it was basically fine. And then recently that loophole was closed, which meant that Customs and Border Protection have been tasked in the last year with trying to keep cotton that was grown in Xinjiang out of the US. And that seems really simple. Basically, Xinjiang is in far west China, and it is a place where a situation is unfolding that is being described by many countries, including this one, as a genocide. It involves a lot of people in internment camps, and a lot of the people in internment camps being used as laborers to both produce garments and also work in cotton harvest. So this is literally slave cotton. And we're trying to say, okay, we don't import goods made with slave labor, so we cannot import things from Xinjiang. And it's really, really hard to do on the ground. Like, how do you actually make that happen? Talking to people at Customs and Border Protection and talking about people who work for NGOs and talking about people who work for brands, the sense that I got was that brands don't necessarily want to admit. They want to say they just can't figure out where stuff comes from. That's basically their argument. It's like, it's really complicated and we just can't really figure out where it all comes from. And there is some reality to that, in that because of the way that textile and garment industry has become globalized, which is a story that I try to tell, and it's not a politically neutral story at all. It is the case that cotton moves somewhere else to be spun, and moves somewhere else to be knit, and somewhere else to be sewn, and somewhere else to be dyed and finished and treated. And it is very hard to track. But I think that one of the things historically that in the US, at least, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union tried to insist on is that if you are the one paying people to make stuff for you, you have to be responsible for that process, that entire process. You have to be responsible for that. And I think we've really lost that. And I think it's not actually that much to ask. I mean, it's like, I'm just thinking about, if I just saw the movie, the Bodyguard.
Oh my God.
I was on
the
a
Whitney
plane.
Houston movie.
What?
The Whitney Houston movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I had completely forgotten that Whitney Houston's sister is the one who hired the hitman who's trying to kill her.
Wow.
I think I was a child,
okay.
and I just didn't get that. Yeah. But anyway, she put out this hit on Whitney Houston, and then like that was what animated the whole plot. And I guess I'm just thinking about it because it's like, you can't hire a hitman and then be like, oh, I don't know. Like, you paid for the hitman. And so like somebody paid to have like 3,000 Zara dresses made at like 25 cents a dress. And they said, if you don't make it for 25 cents a dress, we're not going to pay you. And if you don't get it here by next Tuesday, we're not going to pay you. And then they're like, oh my gosh, a factory collapse? That's really weird. I have no idea why that happened. You know what I mean? So it's really complicated, but it's also not that complicated.
Well, I mean, on some level, you're right. It's like totally cut and dry. But then on the other hand, I mean, I got asked this question a lot when I did articles of interest. People would turn and be like, so what do I do? Like, what clothes do I get? And, you know, I don't want to be like, clothes should probably cost a lot more. It's like, far be it from me. Like, I can't afford how much clothes should cost when you see how much a handmade sweater actually costs. It's like, you know, if we see it as a technology, it should be hundreds to thousands of dollars. But like, we can't, considering we all legally have to get dressed and we can't ask that of people, I'm just going to pose the question to you. Like, what do we do?
Yeah, I know. I've been really working on finding ways to shunt that question to the sidelines. But basically, I've come up with like a few different strategies. I'll just like throw things at the wall until something sticks. I think that, first of all, as you say, we're legally all required to get dressed. To me, the reason I try not to blame the consumer, as it were, or insist that this is, if consumers just did it right, this problem would go away, is because that's not how it is, in my opinion. And I think that there's a very real way in which, as the minimum wage has stagnated, as retail workers' wages in particular have like plummeted, that that level of wage stagnation in the US goes hand in hand with like this incredible plenitude of cheap garments. So you can't fix, I don't think you can fix one thing without fixing the other thing. I think that having workers in Bangladesh who are so exponentially more cheap than a very low wage worker in Iowa kind of create this symbiosis where the worker in Iowa can buy a bunch of clothes. I don't want the worker in Iowa not to be able to buy clothes. You know, it's just, yeah, I think that it's a moment when, to think about labor, we have to think globally, and that's a big deal, and that's hard to figure out. And I think until relatively recently, until 2005, there were tariffs that modulated the level of clothes coming into this country, which enabled the garment industry to exist in this country. So I don't want to talk about tariffs really, because I don't want to sound like Donald Trump, but that actually was a really awkward moment for me where I was like, I have a thing in common with Donald Trump in a way, which is that I do kind of understand how tariffs would, I mean, he wasn't, of course, talking about tariffs on garments because it's, this is a real pet peeve of mine, but I think when people think about American deindustrialization, they think about cars and steel and men losing their jobs. But when the textile and garment industry disappeared here, about a million people lost their job, and a lot of them were women. And so, where am I going with this? I'm avoiding the question of what should we do. I mean, I do think we have to think about it in a big systems labor level, I think.
And you are saying that a lot of it is government policy, like so much. I was shocked by how much of the system was shaped by like,
and it's
export policy.
It's so boring that it's like hard to like. My editor, I'm grateful to her for this, but she just kept on making me pare back the tariff section, and I kept on having to be like, but like it's this tariff thing is a really big deal, but it's really hard for it not to be really boring. But yeah, I'm just gonna give you a capsule version. Okay, basically, it used to be the case that tariffs were set by Congress, and that gave Congress the ability to think about their constituents. Like textile people from textile states had the ability to say, no, we really need to protect textiles. And that was moved to the executive. And since then, every single president up until Trump has and I don't think he did anything coherent to move it in an opposite direction, but has more and more trade liberalization. So we had like NAFTA with Clinton, and then we had the expiration completely of the multi-fiber arrangement, which created a global system of tariffs that modulated the levels of garment imports. So once that disappeared, it wasn't possible to have a clothing or a textile business in the US. I mean, there are some, and there are some coming back, and there is an interest, and people are actively seeking this out and actively wanting to make garments, but they are going to always be competing. I mean, when this started after World War II, it really freaked manufacturers out. And they're like, what? You can just bring in t-shirts from Japan? We're screwed. Yeah. And they were right. They were screwed. And it was, and under Kennedy, a system was established that would make it so that the industry would die slowly. But there was never any question that the industry would be allowed to die. It was a very concrete choice, a political choice. Like, that's what I'm trying to say. Correct.
So wait, if it's a concrete choice, who can we say, like, which president, who killed American clothing manufacturer? Who done it?
Well, I mean, I don't really think you could pin it on one. Well, it's like, let's speculate. I mean, it could be Kennedy. Wow. But I think, I mean, he kind of, yeah, I think that I don't think it was actually Kennedy, but I think that it was a particular deal that he made that cut the legs under from, cut the legs from underneath those forces that would have liked to return to a pre-war situation where there was a real and meaningful barrier against the import of unlimited textile and garments into the US. I think he said, look, guys, like, that was nice, that was fun, we had a textile industry, but like, we're moving on. And a lot of that was done, as I try to show in the book, in the interest of Cold War policy, because we really wanted to establish textile industry and garment industry in the Far East so that they wouldn't fall to communism. So this was a big geopolitical strategy. And I think the way it gets told often is, like, all of a sudden these goods started flowing in from Japan for some weird reason. And that this was an industry that was built by the US State Department.
It's so interesting. I knew none of this stuff. It was so fascinating. And I mean, there's so much more we could say about it, but I guess, before we get to questions, I wanted to say, I think it was so interesting that you've been thinking about ways to restructure the entire system of how we make clothes since your early 20s, when you were considering being a tailor. Can you explain why you were considering becoming a tailor and why that didn't pan out?
Yes, I think the theory that I had at the time, and I don't think it was a terrible one, I think it's just that I am less like, I don't know if I'm less utopian, but maybe I put less pressure on myself. But at the time I was like, I need to figure this out.
I will save clothes, yes.
And what I figured out was that, that there should be a lot more tailors, because tailoring is really intelligent, skilled work, and it is satisfying. And a tailor is somebody who is using their mind and their imagination and their body. And I like in my own work to use all three of those things. So I like to imagine that other people also would like to do that. So I thought, okay, what if we had a bunch more tailors? I wouldn't want to work in a garment factory, mass producing garments. Although I think there are ways that that can be a good job. We demonstrated that in the US when that was a unionized job. I personally wouldn't enjoy that. And I think I would. I think tailoring is good work. So I thought, what if there was a bunch more tailors, and then we just have to figure out the fabric part. And there's already people making khadi cloth, for instance, in India. There's a huge amount of cloth being produced on a village scale using old techniques in ways that support communities. There's fabric being produced in ways that allow the worker to have some agency and some creativity, which for me is a really big value. I think that people are allowed to make stuff that they design, that they want to make, that they have some say in how it looks, I think matters. So I thought, okay, we can figure out the fabric part. There's already people doing it in India. We've got a lot of capacity to make wool in the US. We've got amazing capacity to make linen if we could just get it together with that, because the climate is good for making linen and we just don't. So anyways, I thought we could just figure out the fabric piece and we'd have like one tailor for every, I don't know, 400 people or one, I don't know exactly how many, but that was like the utopian vision. What actually happened was I enrolled in a tailoring class and I realized that tailoring is real precise. It's just real detail oriented. You just have to be willing to really think about how a pocket is constructed and not try to think like, oh, maybe it doesn't really matter if I fold it twice instead of once. Like that's kind of my style. I'm not a person who's like baking out follow recipes. I'm like, oh, that looks about right. Yeah, that looks about good. Like that works for a lot of things. It does not work for tailoring. So I think I found myself constitutionally unsuited to the trade.
So why, I mean, okay, I promise we'll get to questions soon. But the key thing I found in researching clothes, the parallels that always come up are food, like what you put in your body and what you put on your body, and writing. Like there's this real connective thread, wink, between clothing and writing. So how do you think the trades are similar? What's the connection there?
Wow. So many ways. I mean, the original, I go right back to the Fates and the Norns spinning the life of a single hero or a single person. I mean, it's easy to tell a story while you spin. That's why we spin a yarn. It's easy to chat while you knit. It's easy to chat while you weave. I think these activities are so compatible with storytelling already that perhaps that's the root of some of the numerous metaphors that compare telling a story to making a textile. And then for me, as someone who grew up not spinning, not knitting, not weaving, and really only came in on the sewing end, which is the last step, I think that the most excruciating thing that connects them is that they are both so fussy. Like, I think they're both creating form, I guess. And I think for writers, there's a real desire for the tactile. And I know that there's some writers really love to cook. Some writers really love clothes. I remember this Diane Rehm quote once where she said someone asked her why she was so skinny, and she said she loved food, but she realized she loved clothes more, which is really a sad thing in a way, because I don't think you have to be really skinny to look good in clothes, but maybe in her time that was what was felt. I don't know how I got to that, but maybe because she's such a storyteller, because she's so oral. I mean, her voice has shepherded me through so many moments. And I know that she's someone who really cares about clothing. And so many of the writers I love really care about clothing. And all I can say is I completely agree. They are so intertwined. And it's been understood by people for as long as myths from people remain, because it's always the spinner goddess who's creating people's fates, or the weaver goddess who's creating fate.
Or the spider, yeah.
Or the spider, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's so, the touchstone I come back to over and over again is like, and you write about this too, the Latin word textere, like to weave, is the origin of the word text. And it's like a bringing together of so many things. Okay. Speaking of bringing together so many things, there's a lot of process questions in here. Benjamin asks, was there a chapter of your book that ended up being significantly different than you expected when you started writing? If so, what surprised you about it?
Good question, Benjamin. Let me think about that. I think the chapter that is on my mind lately is the chapter that was about export processing zones in Honduras. Maybe because I had to look at it again, or it was condensed and published in The Guardian. And if anyone wants to read it and just get a little taste of the book without reading the whole book, go read the piece in The Guardian. And I was thinking about the process of writing that article, and it made me physically ill. It was something I had never experienced before, but I had to titrate the time I spent on that research because it made me feel nauseous. And it was a weird thing where I had to strategize about, like, I want to get in and out of this fast because I need to be done feeling this way, but I also can't spend all day reading about the story of the US and Honduras because it makes me actually ill. And that sounds a little bit hyperbolic, but that was just my experience as I worked on that chapter. And it was a brand new challenge as a researcher and writer to think, okay, how am I going to physically manage this research process, which had never happened to me before. So it doesn't exactly answer your question, Benjamin, but it's what came to mind.
I mean, I'm sorry, I have to selfishly ask a follow-up question to that, which is, obviously you're someone who's been thinking about clothes for a long time. How did this book, change your own dressing and shopping habits?
It didn't. It didn't. It didn't really change them. I still do the same thing that I did before.
Which is what?
Which is that I love thrift stores. I just love thrift stores. And it's like, not everyone has to love thrift stores. I get a lot of peace out of them. When I was working on a thesis in graduate school that was going to become this book years later, I would just kind of almost come to in a thrift store. I'd be like, whoa, how'd I get here? And I lived in a small town where you could just kind of wander around. And I think it's really soothing to me to be with fabric and to look and to look and to look and like, oh, that font is definitely going to be made in Korea, just over time, like gathering this sense of it, but it's driven by pleasure for me. I love thrift stores, so I'm happy to spend a long time until I find something that's really cool, and that's not the case for everybody. So I'm not recommending it. I think that's just, I love thrift stores, and every once in a while I like to buy something new, and it is really going to be something kind of expensive because that's, I think the good stuff does tend to be pretty expensive, but I don't want to get into giving advice. I really don't, but that is how I dress, is that I love thrift stores, and every once in a while I get something new, and usually I kind of like skulk around for a year before I buy it. I want it, and then I kind of like, I'm like, oh, I want it. I want it for a long time usually before if I don't want it it's like I try to, it's like a kid, it's like, oh, well, he'll forget about it like in an hour. But for me, I'm like, I'll forget about it in a week. And if I don't, I'm like, well, maybe I'll forget about it in a month. And if I'm still thinking about it in a year, then I buy it. And usually that works out for me.
Totally. And then you like wear it all the time and it brings you so much joy every time.
Yes.
An anonymous attendee asks, discussions of fast fashion have increased during the pandemic. Is this push for thrifting and sustainable clothing itself a trend, or do you imagine it will change the industry?
Yes, I think it's a trend, and no, I don't think it will change the industry.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry. I should have thought before I said that. That is my first thought. Let me think if I have a second thought.
I mean, I'm curious why that was your knee-jerk reaction.
I just think it's very tempting to think that we can fix really big systemic problems caused by capitalism by new and different and more, I don't know, by different forms of capitalism. I think that sometimes like doesn't seem very promising to me, and that sort of often feels like, I think that it's cool. I mean, I'm happy for people to get into thrifting, and I'm happy for designers to think about sustainability. I think that is a real positive thing. So I don't mean to say that doesn't mean anything, because it does. Particularly the designers thinking about sustainability thing. I mean, sure, if we want to just stop making stuff and just all use the stuff we've already made for a real long time, we could try that. But I think people like making things. I think it's actually very pleasurable and very important to the human species to go back to the beginning, or what makes us human, where we really enjoy creating. And I think we ought to be able to create. And I think we ought to be able to create things in ways that don't destroy that don't destroy the carrying capacity of the soil, or don't destroy other human beings' lives. And until we can do those things, I don't know that we'll be really making clothing sustainably.
That's such a fair way to put it. Thank you for saying that, because I feel like that argument gets trotted out a lot. Like, just stop making things. And I feel like that's the same thing that I get so upset about when people, someone gets on a tear of like, everyone stop making new podcasts. It's like, well, you would never say like, stop making new books, or like, stop making movies. Like, we're not going to stop it. I don't know. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Anjana, but she says a very sweet comment. Sophie, you are brilliant. Can you speak to clothing choices by populist and radical movements? Did you learn of examples of revolutionary garb that also countered the abusive history of capitalist fabric production?
Ooh. Great question, Anjana. And I always have loved, I think maybe you know this about me, that I've always loved the Zapatistas outfits. I mean, those are good outfits. They are. And it's like a lot of hand weaving, and then knit cap. I mean, Gandhi's like the number one example. Gandhi says like, okay, how am I gonna produce a visual symbol that articulates an idea to a large landmass that doesn't share one common language, and like comes up with this incredible symbol of the spinning wheel, and the simple act of creating your own garment as a way of saying we can have economic self-sufficiency as a nation. So I think Gandhi's kind of I would say the ultimate political garment that comes to my mind first would be Gandhi's little dhoti, because he made it, and he made it for a reason, and he made it out of particular material to talk in a very particular way about a particular history of oppression, and that's what he wore, and then I think sometimes that gets lost. And then I mean, we could also talk about bloomers and bloomer costumes, which were a really big statement for women to wear bloomers, and now I think they're like these kitschy symbol of quaint ye oldie ladies, but like people had rocks thrown at them for wearing those. People were really mad at women for wearing those, and they wore them anyways. So that's another one that comes to mind in terms of women at a certain point deciding that they wanted to be able to walk in clothes and not have their internal organs like injured. Those are my top two, I'm going to say right now: bloomers and Gandhi, top three, and the Zapatistas.
I mean, one of the interesting things that I loved was even the like superficial trend. I think there's a lot of like derision of trends. We're like, oh, that's a passing trend and it's not style and it's not forever. But I thought what was really interesting that you also brought up is that there were certain trends that were like really political. And my favorite, of course, being, I don't speak French, I'm going to butcher it, but the inoculation poof. Like the hairstyle that was to celebrate the king getting vaccinated and was to like promote vaccination. That's so awesome. It's not like radical per se, but you know what I mean? It's like always saying, it's been like intertwined with politics for a long time. And so Amy asks a really fun one. What is your favorite, well, she asked each of us, what is your favorite article of clothing and why? You go first.
You really beat me to the draw there. I I have to say that this would change depending on when you ask me. But I can give you my answer for today. Or I don't know if I actually can. Yeah, I can give you my answer for today. I have this pair of corduroys that were made by a company called Woodland Waders that used to make clothes on Martha's Vineyard in the 80s and I think early 90s. And they were given to me by a friend of my little brother at a time when my father was dying and I was having a hard time in a lot of different ways in my life. And this pair of trousers, like, it just like helped me stand up straight. They're so well made and they fit me so well. And they were delivered to me with a cropped wool jacket, which was also the same company. She had found it at a thrift store and she just thought like, Sophie will like this. And it like helped me be a person. And I still have the corduroys and I wore them as a uniform when I used to take care of this old lady. I had to wear black and they were my only black pants. I wore them every day for months in this job and they're still impeccable. Like they're so well made that I was wearing them the other day and I was like, when was I taking care of Mrs. Wilkie? That was 10 years ago. When did I've had these for decades now and they're solid. So I think I'm going to say those for right now.
That's so, but that like really gets back to this idea of clothing as a technology, you know, it's like a hard drive. It holds memories. It like holds us. That's so beautiful. Mine is not as good. Mine is just, I have this Agnes B cardigan that is so soft and so comfortable. And it somehow manages to always look professional. And it was the last garment. It's like the last new thing I bought. And I bought it in the store just before the pandemic. And I remember it was like before everyone was wearing masks and the store attendant was like, it's really something to this pandemic thing, huh? I was like, yeah, wild. And then like, I bought this cardigan and proceeded to wear it. I mean, I was going to wear it tonight. I wear it all the time. It just makes me look instantly professional, even though it's secretly a sweatshirt. Let me see what else. Okay, Lucy asks, or says and then asks, Sophie, this is so wonderful. When you traveled around the world speaking to workers, did any garment workers you spoke to talk about their own clothes and the choices they made around textiles or the choices they didn't or couldn't make? Also, I loved your point about the process of history creating the body. Did any of the workers you speak to about their experiences of their bodies? Did any of the workers you speak to talk about the experiences of their body vis-a-vis their work in the clothing industry?
Great questions. And I think that reveals something about which I'm a little bit ashamed, but I think it's worth talking about because a lot of the places that I visited, I didn't have direct access to workers. I came in on the capitalist side. Like I came in because I got in touch with the guy who owned the factory because that was how I could get in. And the workers were like there, but I wasn't like talking to them. So that was a very bizarre experience for me. So the reason for that was partly access and partly like you kind of had there are people who have made the effort to talk to workers in some of the places that I was, and they did that by not going into the factory. They did that by like field work outside because of access and because of needing to not impact people's lives negatively. So there was a lot of like ethical and logistical like things that kind of were coordinated in that. But I mean, I can tell you about a tailor that I met in New York who tailors for advertising and fashion. And she described the feeling of pain in her body after working all day and said to me, and I think it's important, she said, I go to the most expensive yoga in New York. Like I go to the chiropractor every week. And this is what I have to do to keep my body going. So this is like an upper middle class tailor talking about her body and what it takes to make clothes all day, every day. So obviously that's not accessible to most workers who are making clothes all day, every day. So that to me was the most direct thing in connection with the body that someone told me in an interview.
Well, I guess this is like one of the, oh, sorry. No, stop talking. I have so many things to say.
I know, I really, really wish this conversation could just go for like another hour or like maybe a week or so, because this has just been so interesting, but unfortunately we are out of time. Sophie, any final words?
I just want to thank you, Avery, you're really good at this. I guess this is why you have a podcast.
Well,
And
everyone has a podcast.
and I didn't know that people told people to stop making podcasts. That is horrible.
Thank you.
And yeah, and I just want to thank everybody who came and who asked these really good questions. And I've had a really good time tonight, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to get to share this work with the world, because it's been kind of my private kingdom for a lot of years, and it's really nice to give it to you all now.
Well, thank you again, Sophie and Avery, for giving your time tonight. I know you're both busy. Thank you again for just taking this time to give this incredible conversation. And thank you to everyone at home who's tuning in, for authors, publishers, indie bookselling, and our incredible staff at Harvard Bookstore. Thank you again for supporting indie businesses. If you would like to purchase a copy of Warren, there is a link in the chat. Go there, shop indie, shop local, support Sophie and her hard work. Thank you again for tuning in. Have a great rest of your night. And so sorry if we didn't get to your questions. There were so many. Have a great rest of your night, everybody.